any other honored guests, and my brothers. All right, vocation story round 2. My story begins the same way as last time. I'm from a Catholic family. My parents really encouraged me to pray even from a young age. But what's kind of strange, I guess, is that I was, from a young age, surrounded by priests. My pastor, the priest in my school, and then my uncle, Father Paul, my cousin, Father Craig, even my great-uncle, Father Richard. So in my mind, priesthood was just kind of something that guys did. It was kind of a more common thing. I guess I had a bad sample. But out of that bad sample, I saw the priesthood as something attractive. All the priests I knew were also the happiest people I knew, and I thought that that's something that I'd want to do. I didn't really think that God was calling me to the priesthood, though, until in 8th grade. I went to a young men's discipleship camp. And that was really the first time in my life that I was around other guys my age who actually cared about God, who actually cared about their faith. And at that week, we went to Mass every day. We spent time in prayer. And that was the first time, really, that I felt the desire in my heart to pray. And so after that camp, I started trying to pray every day, pretty unsuccessfully. On that retreat also, Father Todd, our vocation director, preached on the Gospel of Matthew. The harvest is abundant, but the laborers are few. So ask the master of the harvest to send out laborers for his harvest. He said Christ was longing for people to bring the people of the world to Christ, but he needed men to serve as priests. When he was preaching, I felt a burning desire in my heart to answer that call. After that camp, the desire remained, sometimes more, sometimes less, but it was always there. And so I realized that probably I would have to go to seminary eventually. But at that point, it was still 4 years away. Looking back on the 4 years between that summer and when I entered seminary, I think I have rocks for brains, and also that it's really a miracle that God brought me here. At that time, I really struggled living according to my faith. Mostly, I did poorly. I began doubting that I could ever be a priest. I really believed that I was an awful person and that I had destroyed the plan that God had for my life. And so I tried to do anything that I could to distract myself from that sucking emptiness that I felt. I filled all my time with school, extracurricular activities, hanging out with friends, playing video games, really anything that I could do to prevent myself from self-reflection. But that emptiness was really always hanging over me. And out of that, I began doubting God, and I began doubting the faith that for so long I'd been so certain about. I started to despair that God could ever bring me to the priesthood, and I started to despair that God could ever save me. That despair turned to anger towards the God who I thought had given me such a great burden that I could never fulfill. I started questioning my faith more and more and started reading arguments from atheists. I was persuaded by the likes of Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and Sam Harris. But those were my pre-Gensler days. Their arguments seemed really strong, and my faith seemed ridiculous and foolish. I wanted the truth. So I decided that I would give God one last chance, and I prayed, God, if you're real, prove to me that you exist, or I'll leave you forever. And I gave him 30 days. I knew I needed to give him a fair shot, though, so I turned to the Anglicans. I started reading Clive Staples Lewis's Mere Christianity. And reading that book from C.S. Lewis, a philosopher, I really saw how reasonable the faith was. He laid out good philosophical arguments, and after that, in a moment of grace, I was convinced of the truth of the church. But I still despaired that God could ever bring me to the priesthood. So I needed a plan B. It was senior year. I decided to settle on chemical engineering because I could make bank, I could find a beautiful wife, and I could have lots of cool stuff. But the emptiness kept hanging over me. And eventually, I again fell into the problem of self-reflection. It was late April, and one night I was reflecting on my future. All the plans that I had just seemed hollow. They didn't really seem like they could fulfill me. And so I said, what the heck? Contacted Father Craig and came on a visit to the seminary in May after the Chrism Mass. On my visit at SJV, I knew that this was where God was calling me to be, but I still believed that I couldn't be a priest. So I avoided thinking about it again. On the drive home, the 3-hour drive home with Father Craig, we kind of talked about other stuff, but I kept kind of pushing away from talking about whether God was calling me to the seminary or not, until we got 5 miles from Marshall, where I live, and then I broke down and started sharing what was going on. So we parked in a Perkins parking lot and talked for about an hour. Father Craig eased my fears and shared with me that if God was calling me to the priesthood, that he would make it happen. And so for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. After that, I got in contact with Father Codd, our vocation director, got the paperwork for seminary, changed schools to UST, and I came here. Seminary has been really difficult for me, but it's also been extremely wonderful. I'm so grateful to God for calling me here and for continuing to bring me closer to him. Praise be Jesus Christ.
Now and forever.